Well, everyone should, now that I am reminded to turn off my cell phone, which I didn't do. If everyone else could turn off their cell phones, that would be wonderful. Welcome.
Mary, you want to stand up here? Or?
Yeah, I'll come up there to announce yours, but yeah, since
The intrepid crowd.
Yeah, it's a good crowd.
you put our critical mass, right?
Yeah.
Well, it is the most beautifully decorated room in the graduate section.
It is. It'll be a shame to see them come down.
I know.
I have to take pictures of it.
And this still comes. You okay with the internet?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks a lot. Shall we move forward? Welcome, everyone. Today is International Day of Peasant Struggle. And so there's a reason why this event is today. My name is Mary Taylor. I'm the Assistant Director of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics, and we're thrilled to have to be sponsoring this panel entitled Food Justice, Food Sovereignty, and Building Solidarity Towards a Just Food System. What I'm going to do is introduce the moderator for the evening, and then he'll take you through the other speakers. So here at my far left is Tristan Quinn Thibodeau. He is the outreach and partnership. Is that right? Now I've got my notes are slacking. Outreach and partnerships director in global movement projects at Why Hunger here in New York. He works to support social movements in the global South and to support grassroots organizations in the U.S. and to build solidarity amongst them. He's a member of the coordination team of the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, and he holds a master's degree in philosophy from the New School for Social Research. So I'll turn it over to you, Tristan.
Great, thanks, Mary. So just want to start off by giving a big thank you to Mary Taylor, to CUNY, to the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics, for making this event happen, opening up this space. And also want to thank panelists for coming. Just want to say a few quick words about Why Hunger. I'm not sure if folks are familiar. And I'm also not going to use this mic, if that's fine. If that's a problem, let me know. So Why Hunger works with grassroots groups in the US, as well as with social movements outside of the US, in the global South primarily. And what we do in the US is to raise up grassroots groups that are trying to build movement and connect them to movements outside of the US. And we do this around food and agriculture and hunger. One of the problems is that in the US, the issue of hunger is a charitable issue. It's not necessarily a political issue. So we also work to try and politicize that conversation and politicize the organizations that deal with hunger in the US. And one of the ways we do this is through the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, which Mary mentioned, and it's up on the board if you want to go check it out, usfoodsovereigntyalliance.org. So tonight we're going to hear from some amazing leaders in food justice, food sovereignty, and I guess global solidarity activism. So joining us by Skype, although not yet, so it's in process, is Siobhan Jean-Baptiste. I'm going to do some introductions right now, and then we'll move on to the panelists talking. But Siobhan is the general coordinator and the founder of the peasant movement of Papai, MPP. Papai is a small village in the Central Plateau of Haiti. And he's also the national coordinator for the National Peasant Movement of Papai Congress. It's the national version of MPP. He's a member of the International Coordination Committee of La Via Campesina, which is a global peasant movement. He's an agronomist, an expert in peasant education and organization, and a specialist in cooperative management and organization. In 2005, he was the recipient of the Goldman Environmental Prize and received the Alan Sean Feinstein World Hunger Award from Brown University in '93. For us in the US, he's also probably best known for leading, along with MPP and other Haitian social movements, a march and action to burn sort of Trojan horse donation of hybrid seeds by Monsanto following the 2010 earthquake. And then our other distinguished and esteemed panelist is Nancy Romer. Nancy is the chair of the governance board of the Brooklyn Food Coalition, also the founder of the Brooklyn Food Coalition, which is a grassroots food justice organization working for healthy food access for all, sustainable food systems, and justice for food workers. She organized the first Brooklyn Food Conference in 2009. I imagine a lot of folks in here were there. And established the Brooklyn Food Coalition the same year. And was also its general coordinator until 2013. She recently returned from India and Sri Lanka, where she was visiting peasant women and fisheries movements for food sovereignty. And she's traveled in Venezuela, Bolivia, Mexico, and Honduras, maybe other countries, Guatemala, to also learn from these social movements and learn about food sovereignty. She's also a professor of psychology at Brooklyn College. And then to my right is Rob Robinson, who's a member of the Campaign to Restore National Housing Rights, which is supported by the National Economic and Social Rights Initiative, NESRI, a policy and research organization. He's also a member of the Land and Housing Action Group with Take Back the Land, which is also up on the chalkboard. And Take Back the Land is a national movement and a member of the U.S. Human Rights Network. He's a member of the Planning Committee of the U.S. Social Forum, a champion of, and also a champion of building international solidarity. Rob contributes to the U.S. Friends of Mavi, which is the movement of people affected by dams in Brazil, in building strategic alliances in the U.S. and North America. So that's this great panel. And then while I'm up here, I just wanted to give brief outline of why we're doing this event. Why we're having this conversation about food justice, food sovereignty, and global solidarity. And I just want to see how familiar folks are in the audience with food justice, food sovereignty. Is this the first time you're hearing of these? The 10th time you're hearing of these? Okay, so everyone's pretty experienced. Well, then I guess what I want to say is just that these issues are important not just because food is important, but or we care about food or something like that, but because the food and agriculture and aquaculture systems really affect all of the major crises we're dealing with: climate change, health, poverty, human rights, social justice, and they also have some of the strongest movements in the world organized. Especially movements for food sovereignty in the global south. These are very powerful movements, both in terms of the numbers of people that they can mobilize and that buy into the concept, but also in terms of their transformational vision. Meanwhile, in the United States, there's a lot of amazing grassroots energy organizing around food justice for the food system. Many of the same analyses of the root causes, but there's not as much linkage between movements outside the U.S. and growing movements inside the U.S. as there could be and should be. And so they're just amazing opportunities for learning and growth. And I think another issue, and I hope folks on the panel will address it, is that in the U.S. we may think we understand how to be in solidarity with people outside the U.S., but it's very hard to get outside of an imperial frame. And so it's important to also address what it means to be in solidarity. And so that's another reason to have this panel. So last thing is that this is April 17th, which Via Campesina is called the International Day for Peasants or Farmers' Struggles. And it's a day to commemorate an attack on peasants back in 1996 And it's to raise up the sacrifice and the struggle that hundreds of millions of people are going through for a better world. So with that in mind, I guess I want to turn it over to Nancy Romer, who will share with us her experience organizing in Brooklyn around food justice, her experience with food justice on a national scale, and her work connecting food justice and food sovereignty.
Well, hi, thank you for coming, even on this vacation week. So it may not be vacation for all of you, but thank you for coming. And thank you to Why Hunger, to Salo and Tristan, and to the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. Thank you very much for having us. This is the most beautiful room, the most beautifully decorated room. And I think we wanted to bring banners because we wanted to visually display the joy, really, of the unity that can be. So, Tristan said some of what I wanted to say and will reiterate, but I think that the two big issues that face us as a planet are corporate control over everything, our minds, our economy, our media, our governments, and climate change, and they're totally connected. Because we have corporate control over almost everything, we are going off the cliff. And if the only value is profit, then we're not looking at what will happen when we go off the cliff. And if those of you who have read Naomi Klein's Disaster Capitalism, or know that that some people, some corporations will profit from disaster and do profit from disaster. So it's not even just that that the corporations aren't paying attention; they are thinking about how they can profit. So I think that as individuals, as people who have political consciousness, you wouldn't have walked in the room unless you have political consciousness, unless you're interested in figuring out where do we go together. And that's what this is about. So I think all of us are hoping to very much recruit those of you who are not hardcore activists to hardcore activism, because we all really need to be in this. So the food justice movement, I think in North America, I don't know if it's true in Europe as much, but it's true in North America. We use the term food justice movement. In most of the rest of the world, they use the terms food sovereignty. And part of it has to do with the emphasis. Food sovereignty is more often used by people who are growing food and distributing food. And there are people who want to take control over what they're growing, how they're growing it, who they're growing it for, and again, wresting control from the corporations and making decisions within their own communities. So and those of us who have had the honor of visiting peasant communities that are organized, it's always very, very impressive, and it's always very humbling to see the level of organization and dedication. Rob and I were just talking about this earlier, that you can go to see, for example, an organization that I visited in Satara, Maharashtra in India. Mass organizations, tens of thousands of farmers doing incredible work, forcing the government to create massive water-saving structures, and just vibrant demonstrations, and villages just brimming with progressive ideas and organization, and not one penny is exchanged between them for the organization. Nobody pays dues, there's no paid organizers, every officer works gratis. Not because they have a lot of money, they don't, but because this is their lives. This is every minute of their lives, and they have to be in this. And so you see this incredible dedication that is quite impressive. We have a different model here. Food justice activism in the United States has a different look to it. And one of the things that I find so wonderful about food justice activism is that it has the capacity of joining people together from what are siloed movements, sort of sub-movements, and pulling them together. and I'll get to what some of those movements are. But why don't I do that and then I'll come back. So it definitely includes the U.S. farmer movement, which would be more part of the food sovereignty movement. So farmers in the United States, organizations like National Family Farm Coalition, the U.S. Food Sovereignty Association, Alliance rather, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, the Mississippi Association of Cooperatives. These are organizations that would define themselves as food sovereignty organizations in the United States. And they are farmers, first and foremost. And some are fishers as well. So that's one big group. Another big group are food workers in the United States. The Food Chain Workers Alliance is an alliance of many of these organizations. There are a lot of worker centers that are involved, like in New York City, we have a bunch of them, brand workers that work with food processors, mostly immigrant folks, mostly people of color, and other organizations like Restaurant Opportunity Center would be considered worker centers. And then there also are, and Rural Migrant Ministries is another, it's not really a worker center, it's a faith organization, but they do a lot of organizing of farm workers. Then there are the traditional unions like United Food and Commercial Workers that are also part of the Food Chain Workers Alliance and make up the Justice for Food Worker component of the food justice movement. There also are, there's an anti-hunger and anti-poverty movement that's very strong and very much part of the food justice movement. And there are a load of organizations in there. There are 50 million Americans who are food insecure, almost all of whom are on some kind of like the SNAP, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, and 87% of those households have kids in them. So it's a lot of poverty in the United States and a lot of hunger. A lot of that is addressed through food pantries, soup kitchens, faith-based organizations, charities. And that particular group is in greatest need of politicalization. The other groups are pretty political. If you go to it, I had the honor of going to a National Family Farm Coalition steering committee. Salo was there as well. These folks, I mean, these are farmers. These are people who are tending the cows, growing the corn, doing all those things. They hate capitalism. They are so anti-capitalist. It's amazing. So anti-corporate. They are class fighters. They're not, making their compromises. They are feeling the heel of all of this on their necks every day. And they're very radical and they're very political. Although you wouldn't guess it immediately if you walked into the room, just sit down for 10 minutes and you'll hear it all. The anti-hunger and anti-poverty folks tend to be more moderated because of funding they get, because of religious limitations, and and they're often very, very generous and kind people, and they're doing very important life-saving work. The other group, and in New York we have a bunch of these wonderful organizations: Hunger Action Network of New York State, Handy's, New York City Coalition Against Hunger, Bread for Life. There are a lot of organizations like this, Brooklyn Rescue Mission. The other grouping is the health and anti-obesity school food movements. I'm grouping them together. They're sort of more health-oriented, although they dance with anti-hunger as well. And these are organizations that are concerned about what the corporations are dumping on us. If you're interested in Nick Freudenberg from Hunter School of Public Health has a great new book called Lethal But Legal, and it's about food and tobacco and guns, but a lot on food. And he looks very carefully at how our food tastes are being pushed on us, and particularly in low-income communities where crappy food, unhealthy food is being pushed with great profit. The term food desert is used, but often it's food swamps. It's not that there's no food, it's that it's crappy food. And the school food movement, which Brooklyn Food Coalition has been very active, also been very active in the food labor food worker movement as well, that has been a remarkably successful movement. You know, we've really been able to push, because this is a very much grassroots movement all over the country, not well coordinated, but pushing time. Okay, thanks. Not quite time, 5 minutes, but getting close. Thank you. There's been push from parents and teachers and health advocates all over the country. And in response, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has improved its guidelines and made it harder in some ways, but also better in some ways. I think we'll see in the child nutrition reauthorization, which will be coming up in another year, we'll see some kind of improvement there as well. There's not enough money, that's the biggest problem, but also guidelines have really improved. There really are salad bars in almost every school. There really are water jets. You know, almost all schools have outlawed vending machines and the crappy food that was 5 years ago absolutely standard fare. So you've seen a big change, and I think that's very exciting. You see the success right in front of you, and you want to keep going. So it's very important that we have those successes. There's also this wonderful community garden and urban agriculture movement that's so empowering. I would say, you know, organizations like Growing Power, New York City Coalition of Community Gardens, Black Farmers and Urban Growers, all the communities supporting agriculture projects that bring farmers into the city to provide good food for city people, farmers markets, food co-ops, all of those institutions are really part of this fabric of community food. And then finally, the food and climate change people, the environmental people, the anti-fracking people that have framed their argument in terms of how if we destroy the land and water, how are we going to grow our food? So their frame is not just it's a general danger, but their frame is food and water. So, and Food and Water Watch has been completely brilliant, I think, on that, and great allies. So we have this capacity to bring these different movements together. And I think it's incumbent upon us to do that and to bring politics to it. So in New York City, we have formed the New York City Food Forum. It's a very weak name, but it consists now of 90 organizations. And the 90 organizations include big ones like Food Bank and City Harvest, but it also includes lots of little community gardens and pantry projects and school food projects, and faith organizations. So it's very varied. One of the great strengths, I think, of the food justice movement in New York is not necessarily at the very top leadership, but definitely at the grassroots. It's very much not, I don't know if dominated is the wrong word, but populated by people of color and also by young people. And it's very, very positive because we have to have movements that are led by the people who are most affected by the system that is so destructive. It can't be led by people who have privilege because you can't read the system right, you can't read the solutions right, and you can't organize the people that have to be organized if you're from other communities. It just doesn't work. So I think that's one of the great values of the food justice movement is that we see this great flow of young people and people of color who have a very clear vision about where they want to go with this. So I guess in the discussion we'll talk a little bit more about how we can work nationally, internationally rather. I guess I would say one thing is that we need to be aware of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that new trade agreement that's coming down the pike. Almost all of the trade agreements that you hear about, NAFTA and CAFTA and all these others that, with these acronyms, these friendly little acronyms, they almost all of them override the rights of nations to set environmental and labor standards. So it destroys our capacity to run our own democracies. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership is the latest one to come down the pike. the fast track of it was stopped, which was by not even that much activism. That's the thing that's so interesting to me. You don't need enormous activism, but you need some activism, and you can see some changes. So they stopped the fast track, and now they are going to have it go through Congress, and it's possible that some of the aides will actually read, the congressional aides will read this agreement, at least it will become public. And prior to that, it has not been public. It's all been done in secret. So this is something important to be aware of and to be able to stop, because we need to protect our own nation and our own sovereignty, and we need to be able to stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the global South, because they will be harmed even more than we will be by these trade agreements. So to me, it's a very robust movement, and it's very exciting to be able to be part of this, because it's got so many tentacles. And I think the last really 30 years, we've been in these tiny little silos where people feel like if you don't have a clear ask, you're worthless. You know, you can't do anything. And I think that's so wrong-headed. I think if we have a big movement with a lot of energy and a lot of issues and a lot of different people working together, we can see the kind of system change that we need.
Great, thanks, Nancy. So we can, Siobhan's joined us by Skype, so you can hear Siobhan. I wanted to I forgot to mention it earlier. I was so excited to get to the panel, but the panelists will each speak for about 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll have a long time for discussion. So I guess without further ado, Siobhan will speak, and he's going to be talking about this day, April 17th, food sovereignty, and sort of the meaning of food sovereignty both in Haiti as well as globally.
People, if you can sign on, there are sign-up sheets going around. Sign up, please, and we'll share this.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's a big pleasure for me to talk to you this afternoon. I'm going to speak Spanish because my English is very poor. But it's today, April 17, it's a very important day for the present organization, small farmers organization around the world. I'm talking from Haiti, from MPP. MPP is a small farmers organization, a present organization in Haiti. We have more than 40 years fighting, defending small farmers, defending agroecology method, defending peasant agriculture. But I'm going to continue in English. Isaulo will translate for me.
Perfecto.
MPP es una organización campesina que está en el departamento de centro al centro de Haití.
So MPP is a peasant organization, is located in the central plateau of Haiti.
MPP, este año tenemos 41 años trabajando con los campesinos empobrecidos.
So they are a 41-year-old organization, and they have been working with impoverished peasant families in Haiti.
Somos una organización de jóvenes, de mujeres y de hombres. Totalicemos más de 60,000 miembros.
So they are an organization of youth, women and men, and they have 60,000 people in the membership.
Desde el nacimiento del MPP hemos elegido la agricultura campesina basada sobre métodos agroecológicos.
Since the creation of the organization, they have identified, put the energy towards the peasant agriculture using agroecological practices and techniques.
Porque hoy en el mundo hay dos modelos de agricultura, el modelo campesino y el modelo agroindustrial.
Because in the agriculture they have two models. One is the industrial agriculture and the peasant agriculture model.
La agricultura campesina es una agricultura que está produciendo alimentos sanos para los seres humanos, una agricultura que respeta el medio ambiente, que respeta la vida en el suelo. Es una agricultura del futuro, porque es la agricultura que puede enfriar el planeta en contra del calentamiento global.
So the peasant agriculture produce healthy foods, respect the environment, respect the soil, protect the soil, and is the agriculture of the future, because that's the only one who can cool the planet.
La agricultura industrial está destruyendo el medio ambiente, está produciendo alimentos que es responsable para muchas enfermedades, sobre todo la obesidad, y es una cultura que está destruyendo la vida de los seres humanos, el medio ambiente, y que está contribuyendo a la destrucción del planeta.
So the industrial agriculture model is destroying the environment. Also, it's generating obesity among the population. It's destroying the soils, destroying the environment, but also, and most important, increasingly, is destroying the planet.
Entonces, hoy en el mundo, la agricultura industrial que está en la mano de las multinacionales aún tienen más de 80% de las tierras agrícolas, 70% de la agua para agricultura, está utilizando 80% de la energía, pero produce solamente alrededor de 30% de los alimentos, y la mitad de eso es para animales. Entonces no es la agricultura que puede alimentar a los 7 millones de personas en el planeta.
So today we have the industrial agriculture model that is actually on the hands of corporations. They control 80% of the agricultural land, 70% of the fresh water. They consume 7% of the fresh water of the planet. They use 80% of the energy to produce the food. And actually, they are only responsible for producing 30% of the food that we consume in the planet. But actually, from those 30% of the total, only half of that really goes to to feed directly local markets, people, because they have of those grains and food goes actually to feed animals.
Desde el año 96, la Vía Campesina Internacional presentó a la conferencia sobre la agricultura en Roma el concepto de la soberanía alimentaria.
So since 1996, Via Campesina present the concept of food sovereignty during the World Food Summit, Food Security Summit in Rome.
En el año 2007, más de 500 personas de organizaciones del movimiento social de las organizaciones campesinos hemos realizado la conferencia de Mielení sobre la soberanía alimentaria.
So in 2007, over 500 people from social movements and like organizations around the globe met in Nieleni in Mali to discuss the concept of food sovereignty.
La soberanía alimentaria es el derecho de cada país, de cada pueblo, de definir sus políticas de producción de los alimentos teniendo en cuenta sus costumbres alimenticias, del papel de la mujer en la comunidad.
So food sovereignty is the right of each country, each people, each nation, each community to define their own policies that should be based on the local culture and also in the leadership of women.
Normalmente, cada persona debería saber lo que está comiendo, de dónde viene, y los alimentos no tienen que viajar demasiado.
So it should be a right that each person should know what they are eating every day. And the food doesn't need to travel that far to reach the table of all of us.
La soberanía alimentaria es un modo de vivir, un modo de solidarizarse con entre los pueblos, entre las comunidades, compartiendo semillas, compartiendo alimentos. Entonces, es una cuestión de vida colectiva.
So food sovereignty is a way of life. It's also a way of solidarity between people, between communities. It means sharing seeds, food, and also it's an issue. I missed the last part, but it's Chavan. Por favor, Chavan, ¿podría repetir la última parte? Es una cuestión de...
Es una cuestión de vida solidaria, de vida comunitaria.
So it is food sovereignty. It's an issue of a collective life, shared resources, community life.
Entonces, en Haití, no solamente MPP, pero las organizaciones campesinas, miembros de la Vía Campesina, estamos defendiendo la agricultura campesina.
So not only NPP in Haiti, but other member organizations of Via Campesina in the country, they are defending the peasant agriculture.
Entonces lo hacemos defendiendo las semillas nativas, defendiendo el derecho de los campesinos sobre las tierras agrícolas, sobre la producción de fertilizante naturales y combatiendo métodos de campesino a campesino.
So also they are defending the local seeds, also defending peasants' land rights in the production of natural fertilizers.
Estamos luchando para una reforma agraria integral porque hoy el gobierno está vendiendo las tierras del país a multinacionales que quieren producir agrocarburante, que quieren producir mercancías para la exportación. Entonces, en un país donde 80% de la población tiene hambre.
So peasants in Haiti are struggling for integral agrarian reform. Chavani, me vai explicar o que é isso sobre a reforma integral, agrária integral. So the integral agrarian reform means that it's not only about land distribution, it's about access to education, roads, healthcare, and other services. So the government, it's in Haiti, currently is selling the lands of the peasants to corporations to support the production of agrofuels for export. So 80% of the population in Haiti face food insecurity right now.
Entonces, 17 de abril es una fecha muy importante para los campesinos de Haití y de todas las familias campesinas a través del mundo.
So the date of April 17 is a very important date for the peasants in Haiti, but also all the families around the globe.
Celebramos este día porque marca la muerte de dirigentes campesinos de MCT en Brasil. Entonces, por eso, en la Día Campesina elegimos a esta fecha como la fecha de las luchas campesinas a través del mundo para defender la agricultura campesina, defender el derecho de los campesinos sobre las tierras agrícolas, defender las organizaciones campesinas que tienen la obligación de producir alimentos sanos para todos los habitantes del planeta.
So in this day they celebrate they are celebrating April 17. It's because in this date, April 17, is also the date where 19 peasant leaders were killed in Brazil when they are fighting, defending their land rights. So the Via Campesina elected this date because it's a way of a struggle around the globe to defend the peasant agriculture, to defend the land rights of peasants, to defend the organization, the peasant families who are actually responsible for producing our food and feeding all of us.
La celebración de hoy está sobre todo al torno de las semillas nativas, las semillas naturales, porque hoy el mercado de semillas en la mano de las multinacionales, sobre todo en Monsanto, es un mercado de más de 30.000 millones de dólares. Ellos quieren eliminar a las semillas nativas, las semillas criollas. Entonces, a nivel de la vía campesina, no hay agricultura campesina sin semillas naturales.
So in this year, then in 2014, Via Campesina is celebrating April 17 around the theme of the seeds, because the seeds are mostly right now growing is controlled by few corporations, and they are in the hands of the corporations. It's a market of $31 billion a year. That are in the policies and this action of corporations, they want to eliminate the peasant seeds, the local seeds that the farmers have been developing over the generations. So Via Campesina is celebrating the seeds, because without the seeds, there is no way of having peasant agriculture. There is no way to continue being farmers.
Entonces, hoy las semillas nativas están en peligro porque Monsanto desarrolló técnicas que se llama Terminator, para eliminar completamente a todas las semillas naturales. Entonces es una lucha de todos los pueblos del mundo para defender las semillas naturales, las semillas nativas, porque si no es todo el planeta puede desaparecer con la desaparición de la biodiversidad.
So today the native seeds, the local seeds, the farmer seeds, they are in danger and to disappear, because there has been developed this technology called the Terminator, which is says that is a technology that prevents farmers from planting again the same season next year, so they have to buy again the same seed. Siobhan is emphasizing the idea that this is a struggle, this is a fight of all of us, because all people around the globe, and for us to join forces to defend the local seeds, the native seeds, because again, without those seeds, we are all in danger.
Hoy necesitamos una red internacional de solidaridad para defender a las semillas nativas, defender el medio ambiente, defender combatir la crisis climática, porque el planeta está en peligro. Por eso necesitamos juntarnos desde el sur hasta el norte, gente en las ciudades y en el campo. Debemos juntar, acumular fuerzas para defender el planeta, defender la soberanía alimentaria, defender la soberanía de los pueblos para producir y consumir alimentos sanos.
So we need his defended the idea that we need to create a network of solidarity, international solidarity, to defend the local seeds, the native seeds, the environment, and also to curb the negative effects of climate change, because climate change is affecting the continuation of life. You know, it's that the whole planet is in danger. So he's saying that we need to create alliances and this in solidarity international solidarity network from the south to the north, from the countryside to the cities, so we can defend the planet, defend food sovereignty, and defend life in the seeds in the world.
Es una cuestión de muerte o de vida.
This is a question of life or death.
Para defender la naturaleza. Muchas gracias. En Haití, en la primera semana de junio, vamos a tener una movilización en la defensa de las tierras, de las semillas, de la biodiversidad. Vamos a tener una gran movilización aquí en el MPP con todas las organizaciones del país. Entonces, ustedes son invitados, bienvenidos.
So in the first week of June, MPP is organizing a mass demonstration to defend the seeds, to defend the land, and to defend the biodiversity. With all the organizations in Haiti, ally organizations in Haiti, and he's saying that all of you are invited to participate in this process.
Muchas gracias para este esfuerzo alrededor de la solidaridad internacional para la soberanía alimentaria. ¡Viva la soberanía alimentaria! Entonces yo soy Shaban Jean-Baptiste, portavoz del MPP y también miembro de la Coordinación Internacional de la Vía Campesina. Muchas gracias.
I believe everybody understood here, but he said that thank you so much for having him in this panel. This is Shaban Jean-Baptiste, member, the spokesperson of MPP and member of the International Coordinating Committee of Via Campesina International.
Right, thank you, Shaban. So moving on, we're hearing from Rob Robinson, who's going to be reflecting on presentations and offering new ideas.
Yeah, so before I go into global solidarity and what it means and how it's sort of growing organically, I want to first thank Hunger, Salo, and Tristan for inviting me to this panel. It's always inspiring to be in the room with Nancy and the work that she's done. We haven't worked closely together, but I'm at their conference usually and always interacting with the work that Brooklyn Food Coalition does, because learning more and more about food sovereignty, because the struggle we're all in is a struggle for land. And with land, you get food, commenting land, you get housing, so it all starts with land. This place is also inspiring to me. I have a long history with the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics through different professors, and I'm working closely with Mary right now to put together a conference that's going to happen in May. So the Grad Center has always been like a second home. CUNY has always worked closely with the Take Back the Land movement. We developed a lot about Kerry with the help of students and academia in this place. So it's like coming back home. It's a second home to me. So very appreciative of the opportunity to be on this panel. You've heard from the different speakers talking about this thing called global solidarity and asking for more of it. And it's for Take Back the Land, and for me personally, and I'm going to weave a lot of what I say through my own personal learning experiences, and you'll understand how important it is. And the first introduction for me personally to global solidarity was through Poverty Initiative and Union Theological Seminary in Upper Manhattan, working with the shack dwellers movement in South Africa. And they had brought us into a forum after they'd done a trip to Appalachia, and the shack dwellers had been here and saw what struggle looked like in the United States, and they were reflecting on it. And there was a young man in the shack dwellers by the name of Maswi, who was 14 years old at the time. And as he's explaining what he saw and what was happening to him in South Africa, he was pounding his chest and saying, I have a human right to a home. And that's why we're taking this land, because we have a human right. And he was so passionate about it and banging his chest, and he was 14. and the theory that he had developed and what he had learned in his 14 years on the earth, I was fascinated by, right? It was far beyond anything I had learned, but then constantly making references to the work of Take Back the Land. And I'm like staring at this guy like, how did he know about this? But in all of their struggle, they also learn about what folks are doing around the world. And I thought that was pretty incredible, especially coming from a 14-year-old, right? So that was the first introduction. I've also worked with the U.S. Human Rights Network, doing work in Geneva around human rights. So I'm based in an organization here in New York called NESRI, the National Economic and Social Rights Initiative. And that's a human rights organization. And from the very time that I got involved in social justice work, Kathy Alviser and Tiffany Gardner, who was the director of the Human Right to Housing program in NESRI, recognized the work that Picture the Homeless was doing at the time. I was a member of Picture the Homeless, and said, you all would be a force to reckon with if you wrapped your work around a human rights frame. And I started to ask questions about what that meant, and that meant removing yourself from, as Nancy spoke of earlier, the silos of organizing that we tend to do in the U.S. I can't work with Nancy because she does food sovereignty. I can't work with Tristan because he does healthcare. And that's how we move in the United States, and it's problematic. And you can't build movements, right? So what does solidarity look like when people are talking about struggle, right? In South Africa, they're fighting for land also. In Brazil, they're fighting for land, right? Food, you grow land under food. The fisheries, you may have met Herman Kumara when you went to Sri Lanka, right? Herman is fighting for the security of the right to the water, right? And they live on water is land. It translates to land. So there's a reason why we can all come together, and there's a very basic reason. However, here in the United States, we weren't seeing this so clearly until the calls started to come very loudly and say, we have to move this. And the uprisings that happened in the Middle East and Occupy raised awareness to levels like never before. Right? Take Back the Land had done its work and was starting to grow and build a name for itself. And then constantly, Take Back the Land's biggest struggle was in Rochester, New York, with a woman named Catherine Lennon, who was about to be evicted from her home. We moved her back in Mother's Day 2011, a well-documented story. But as we moved her back in, she received another eviction notice. And the International Alliance of Inhabitants, which is a worldwide organization that fights for access to land and the right to land, and stands on a zero eviction platform, got wind of what was happening with Catherine Lennon. And unbeknownst to us at Take Back the Land, they mobilized their members around the world to start calling Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand's office and asking, why is Catherine Lennon being evicted from 9 Ravenswood Avenue in Rochester, New York? And all of a sudden, we're starting to get calls from these senators' offices wondering what was going on. And we find out later that these folks said it was wrong what was happening even in the U.S., in the wealthiest country in the world, right? And we have to have solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are fighting for the right to the land. So it really emphasized the reason that we need to come together, right? Then we're fighting transnational corporations and global banking, global capital. As we fight the struggle, there is an increasing, a bigger network of banks and corporations that are controlling our lives with capital, right? So in Brazil, transnational corporations are coming in and building hydroelectric plants and dams and pushing people off the land with no alternatives. People who survived in favelas for years. Favela Hasina is sitting up on a mountain near Ipanema Beach. 450,000 people living in this community. All of a sudden, here comes the World Cup and other events in the Olympics, and all of a sudden, these people are being forced out with no alternatives. It's okay if you want to force people out because you want to build in advance, but what are the solutions? Offer alternatives and other places for people to live. It wasn't happening. And land was meant for us to come in, right? If we have land, we grow food, we build a home, and life suddenly changes, right? So how do we go back to those simpler ways of life? And we have to start talking these languages the same and share and struggle. We learned that again at Take Back the Land when so many of these groups from around the world were calling us and saying, could you share how you guys moved this family back in? Can you share the tactics and strategies you used to keep the bank's name public till the bank backed off you and gave you this house to go away, right? So it's shared learning. The opportunities of learning from the shack dwellers, we have all of this technology, right? why not bring them in by Skype to talk to groups on the ground here to talk about their struggle and what they've gone through? Sharing, learning is reciprocal, right? Often we get offended here in this country by learning. Oh, we know it all. We have a sense of entitlement, exceptionalism, right? We do it better than anybody else. When it comes to human rights, the United States as a country will always point its finger at other countries around the world and say, China, you have human rights violations. Iraq, you have human rights violations. I kind of think the US is probably one of the biggest human rights offenders in the world. We just got an edict passed down through the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights to say that the United States is intentionally criminalizing the homeless. For those of you that know my own personal story, I'm formerly homeless, it meant a lot to me, right? It gives me ammunition as an organizer on the ground to get in front of a lot of people, empower a lot of people to have their voices raised and lifted up. So I think that global solidarity is just an important angle, and I hope that we can engage in dialogue here. I don't want to take too long. I think a lot of what I'm going to say is repeated. I think there's a big importance of it to fight back transnational capital, right? Maloon Qatari, who's a former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing before Raquel Rolnick, was at a conference here in New York in October. He said to me, he looked me in the face and said, Rob, you know what? What is oppressing us is global corporations and global capital. The response needs to be a global response and global resistance. So the importance, again, of that global solidarity is important. And I think you heard today a lot of words like shared, collaboration, collectivity. It has always been the fundamental model of the Take Back the Land movement, the work that we've done. We always, when we created theory, when we created PowerPoints, when we created materials, we'd simply say to all of you all, it is open source. Give me your email address and we will email it to you and we'll tell you how we created it, how we thought about it, and how we use it, right? Because it's not going to do the leadership committee, the three individuals, you know, myself, Max Rameau, and M. Adams, and it's not going to do the three of us any good to possess this knowledge and try to win something. We need to get it out to a broader community. We need to get it out around the world. And I think the more we work on this global solidarity thing and lift up the voices and struggles of other people around the world and share the struggles that we're going through, the more powerful of a movement we're going to build, right? I've had the opportunity to go down to, you see the flag from Mavi. I learned so much last September taking a trip to Brazil and watching a movement on an arc, an upward arc, but at a very slow pace. We have a tendency in this country to what I call firefight, run around with a fire hose in one hand, a fire extinguisher in another, putting out fires and running around, and after 10 years we're sitting on the chair and saying, I'm done with this shit, I'm worked out. But right underneath that chair that we're sitting is where the fire was burning from the beginning, because we never got to the root cause. It was sitting on the hot seat in the beginning. So we don't spend a lot of time with theory, self-evaluation in our work. We run around fighting fires and we never take time to reflect. Hence, we don't move a lot. I think the other comparison that I make that I'm learning from global solidarity is you find folks in these other countries that have been engaged in struggle from the time they come out of the womb. It's totally different. You heard Nancy allude to the fact of money and resources. They don't need that. They need human resources. They put their minds in there, themselves together, and they figure out solutions to their own problem. I think self-determination is one of the biggest things that we can learn from movements around the world. So the global solidarity is important, and it's been fascinating for Take Back the Land and fascinating for me as an individual. I've been blessed to get into a lot of spaces around the world, and you know, I look back sometimes and I reflect and I say, you know what? I could talk to folks on the ground in Budapest, Hungary, before I could talk to somebody in Brooklyn, right? If I send an email to Budapest, Hungary, right now, I'm probably gonna get a response in an hour. But if I send it to somebody in Brooklyn, it might take 3 days before I get a response, right? But it's just, you know, they understand, I think, solidarity a little bit better than we do. And I just hope in this country that we start to learn from the experiences of people around the world and sort of push to the side that exceptionalism that's always been hovering above us and preventing us from really moving forward in the way we should move forward. So, you know, we're going to be here for a few minutes. I'd love to engage in dialogue and answer any questions anybody might have.
make sure that Saulo Araujo is thanked for being here, organizing the event, and translating. So,
Yes, definitely. He's my supervisor.
so he better.
Yeah. I apologize.
I want to jump in because it's a great relationship. I go back to Why Hunger for my days at Picture the Homeless, and I'd love to tell this little story. Bill Ayers is the executive director of Why Hunger, and as a member of Picture the Homeless, he does a radio show here in New York, a community radio show on WPLJ 95.5.
It's not the Chicago building.
Right, exactly. I always
It's
have to explain that. But it was interesting. He invited me to his show, and it was the first time as a member of an organization I was invited to his show. And it was great. I went back and forth with him and got to see the studio and do the whole thing live. But somehow the conversation got to urban farming, and I'm like blowing Bill off, saying, "You can't grow tomatoes in the Bronx," And I didn't know much about urban farming at the time. This is going back about 8 years ago. So we had a little back and forth on the air. And Bill made a bet with me. He says, "If I send you to 4 or 5 urban farms around the city, would you go to all of them and then come back on my show and say you were wrong?" And I said, "You got a deal, right?" So he gives me a list, and I go around, and these people fed me in farms like across the street from Yankee Stadium. It was blowing my mind. I went into Brooklyn into farms, and I had to come back. I had to be humble, come back on the air and explain that these urban farms do exist. I was serious. I was like, "You can't grow a freaking tomato in the Bronx. It ain't gonna happen." And I just saw some wonderful work being done and learned a lot about urban farming, like on the fly, right? Boom, sit down, we're gonna talk to you. And it was a great experience. But the organization Why Hunger is just been a fantastic organization. If you know anything about Bill, he's been committed to this work, and obviously by the staff that he has in place. I've worked with Tristan and Saulo for a number of years now, and basically they were the folks that got me involved with Mavi, so it's big ups to Why Hunger and Tristan and Saulo for getting me involved in that program.
I want, if you don't mind, I just want to pick up something that you just said
Sure.
about the community gardens, and then what Siobhan said about communal life. I think that and our exceptionalism.
Right.
I think one of our big problems as a society, and one of our big problems as individuals, is that we're lonely. We don't have real communities that function. And so we're sort of all walking around in our little sad ways, trying to pick ourselves up, trying to be positive, trying to connect where we can. But I think, there's a reason why there's so many mental health problems in the United States. And it has, I think, so much to do with the fact that there isn't communality. And I think that the community gardens provide that for so many people, and they're often culturally inflected. So there'll be a Jamaican garden, or there'll be a Dominican garden, or there'll be an American South garden, or there'll be a South Asian garden, and people. Not that they're exclusive, and you can't join a garden that you don't come from the same cultural background, but there's something wonderful about pulling up your beach chair and having that conversation and growing the foods that are comfortable and familiar and sharing something. And I think the sharing part is just so crucial to who we are as human beings. And it's one of the joys of being in the movement.
Absolutely. I've learned a lot from the gardens on the Lower East Side. I spent a lot of my summer evenings just bouncing through the little gardens on the Lower E with the casitas in them, So it's the Puerto Ricans from way back that have been farming in Puerto Rico, and they're strewn throughout the Lower East Side. They're all over New York, but there's a concentration on the Lower E, and I just spend a lot of time down there in the summer. It's fantastic.
So I think we'd love to hear if folks have questions or comments. Yeah,
There's got to be something that's particularly fancy. Sure.
For these urban-based organizations, how do you make the connection of food to farm workers for these people who reside in urban areas?
The workers. I think that's the big thing. That I think some of the issues that have been raised around living wage, sick days, those are things that urban workers know a lot about. But they're very similar issues for farm workers. in the back, there's a few flyers about this rally for farm workers. You know, in the labor legislation of the 1930s, the deal that the white male union members made with the Dixiecrats in the South was to leave out what were at the time mostly black domestic and farm workers. Now they are black and brown, but then they were mostly black, and that was the deal. Okay, we're going to exclude farm and domestic workers from labor rights so that we can get ours. And now we see this movement of domestic workers in New York State and California and other places as well, winning rights. And we're seeing this with farm workers. So if you're interested, on May 5th, there's going to be a big lobby day in Albany. There's another event that I think it's on the 24th that the Rural and Migrant Ministries is organizing. But I think you talk about, you know, the people that feed us should be able to afford the food that they're giving us. You know, they're providing for us. It's a matter of equity. It's a human right. And, you know, we're so fortunate that they are willing to do this work. They should be compensated and they should have rights. And the biggest problem is the right to organize. They don't have the right to organize, which is totally outrageous.
I think there are 2 points here, right? The human rights issue is a valid one, right? And it allows us to look at it differently. But everybody has to eat, right? And whether you're urban or rural, you know, you have to eat, and food connects us all, right? And we can grow our own food if we have access to land and we have the resources. I think the more we do political education, which wasn't always the way, sometimes people get offended by the word education. For me, I started organizing late in my life, and what I've learned over the last 8 to 10 years is incredible, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I say to people, you can get offended if you want, but I want to learn till I go 6 feet under, until they kick the last piece of dirt under me, keep feeding me information, right? Because the more knowledge you have, the more powerful you become. So if you want to change that dynamic, we need to politicize ourselves, politicize people in our communities, and then rebuild community, as Nancy says. We've gotten, and there's a value narrative in this country that says, that makes us selfish, that makes us look at one, right? So if you get a home, and I look at it from the home angle, right? The home ownership is the way to wealth. Well, I will challenge anybody that, from the 1% to say that they've made their wealth from home ownership. Not in this country, you're not gonna make it that way. And particularly people of color, because there's been issues around access to home ownership for people of color, right? Redlining, predatory lending, right? Pushing you in certain neighborhoods. So it's all related. And when you start to unpack that and understand what has happened over years of time and how policies were created, it opens up people's minds to start thinking, whoa, we gotta work together to change this, right? You know, it's, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think in many instances, and people will challenge me because of that, I think Occupy failed for one of those reasons, right? They failed to create the space to have those conversations, right? One thing we know for sure about Occupy, they could mobilize, right? Those young folks could mobilize behind an issue. But I think the refusal to create space to have conversations about classes and races and sexes and gender and not build with community organizers was a big misstep, because if that ability to mobilize came together with that ability to organize, oh man, we would have had a movement here, right? You would have had a movement, a robust movement that probably would have made some change pretty quickly.
Most of my work is not in the United States, but one of the things that I have come into looking at recently is how the United States and U.S. policy over long periods of time have interfered with people's rights to own land, to control land,
Absolutely.
to have everything. And these were policy distinctions that were made at a very early time. And they have tried to bring it to third world developing countries as well. I mean, there's a history of how President Johnson forced the then Prime Minister of India to pay less attention to land reform. And he did it by saying, we will not give you any food aid, even if there's been a failure of the monsoons,
Right.
and it's a temporary thing only, if you don't do this.
Right.
And all over, I've been looking and looking at some of the historical studies that have been done, and it's really very interesting how U.S. policy has always managed to be pushed in the pro-elite manner.
Right.
Over a long period. The reason why farm workers didn't get the same rights as factory workers and others is because when Roosevelt was putting that through, he could not get enough votes to put it through if he included farm workers. So he had to drop the farm workers at that moment in time. And there's all sorts of stuff like that available. And the history of how it happened here tells us something about the kind of country we are.
I totally agree with that. I don't want to take up a lot of space here, but and I talk about this place. It has been a fantastic spot for me to be connected to that history, to learn. I didn't have that orientation. I grew up on Long Island, suburban Long Island, and I grew up, in a capitalist world, fighting for a job at ADP to keep moving up the ladder. But as I went through that transformation in life of being homeless and then being connected, history gravitating towards me, professors like Neil Smith here and David Harvey connecting me to history and having me read Mark Nason at Fordham University saying, read this book about organizing in the 30s, right? Incredible opportunities to see just what you said. The history of adverse policy in this country, and especially with respect to housing. I mean, it just builds and builds and builds and builds, and we have trouble as individuals unpacking that. The minute you get in a room with some folks and say, we need to have a conversation about the history of race and class in this country. Oh, you're a racist, you're bringing the race into the equation. We gotta talk about it. It's not easy. It's not easy, but some shit happened over 300 years, right? Some stuff happened and we need to talk about it, try to unpack it and learn exactly what happened so we can avoid it to make a better future, right? It's a challenge and people struggle with it, but we have to have more of those conversations, right? It is a lot of policy. One of the things, and I'll just be quick here, we knew that what policy would take back the land, and we made a very strategic decision early on in Take Back the Land. We will not talk to the policymakers. We want policy change. Our job is, and we use what we call a SPARE model of organizing, and the point of that SPARE was positive action, non-violent civil disobedience. We're going to raise that to a level that it pokes the hole that the policymakers want to come talk to us, and then we say, you know what? We have strategic partners. You talk to NESRI, you talk to the U.S. Human Rights Network, you talk to the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, and you talk to the Center for Constitutional Rights. We trust them, they respect us, they know what we want. That's who you talk to. Yeah, policy has to change, but we're not going to have the conversation with you. You're going to have the conversation with our strategic partners. So it's a broad conversation and it gets out all over the country. And it's a challenge. I mean, there's policies in this country that are created that are also exported around the world, so as you said. And this is the other important part of global solidarity, right? Preparing these other folks for what might be coming down the pike, right? We went through a lot of what they're experiencing right now. We've gone through it already. There's that need to share.
I just want to comment on this because I think that one of the problems that we have at the university and in the movements in general in the United States is we feel we have to know everything. Yeah. Oh, I don't know that well enough. I can't advocate for it. Well, maybe there's another point of view. Well, of course there's another point of view. But we seem to need to have so much information before we move. Now, I'm not saying we should have uninformed movements, but one of the wonderful things of talking with people who do not have an advanced education, people who might even be illiterate, is that they often, and they're in motion. I'm not saying, oh, any old illiterate person in the world is going to have a clear perspective. I'm not, elevating illiteracy. But when we meet with, for example, the first time I went to Bolivia, and I spent a fair amount of time in El Alto, which is very poverty-stricken, mostly indigenous, sister city to La Paz, 14,000 feet above sea level. And I was just amazed by the level of conversation in the community meetings. I was totally blown away. The knowledge base was huge, but it was not academic knowledge base. It was experienced knowledge base, and hearing things, listening to the radio, having discussions. I came back feeling like the average person also probably had a better understanding of world politics and what's going on in the broader sense than the average, I will say this out loud, professor at CUNY, because that's how I felt. I felt like everybody was so into their little details and not getting the big picture, whereas I was experiencing this utilization of a big picture. And I think we are so worried about not having every detail that it stops us, it paralyzes us. And part of it has to do with the old slogan, which side are you on? Again, I don't want to be simple about this, but to a certain extent, you have to have a sense. Well, where do I stand in terms of corporate control of our lives, in terms of corporate control over the media, corporate control over the food system? These are not big, you don't have to have a detailed analysis of every little part of it to have an understanding about where you stand. And I think that it's important for us to have these commitments and to the act on.
Here's, in kind of a response to that, Nancy, I will say, while I'll speak in favor of this place a lot, and I think Mary knows this well, we've had some conversations, there are some professors that I wouldn't go near in this place, right? However, I still stand behind the fact that Take Back the Land, we were practitioners. I consider myself a practitioner of civil disobedience and direct action. But you have to wrap that action around theory. Why are you doing this? What are your demands, right? So there are select professors you bring into a room, select students you bring into a room, help us figure this out, right? They get it. So there's an importance. That relationship is still powerful, but I agree with Nancy that the solutions have to come from the people directly impacted, right? That's the biggest thing. But the people directly impacted also need to have access to places like this. So often I say to folks, I will say, I'm privileged to sit up here with Tristan, with Salo, and with Nancy, right? But how do we bring this into East New York, Brooklyn, right? So that other folks besides Rob Robinson gets access to this, right? Folks who are directly affected by the issues, right? And I think, I often, when I get in spaces, and I do it with David, I do it with Neil, and there are select professors that would do that, right? You could get them to come into the community. I think that's important, right? To have a dialogue, but they listen, right? And I think that's important, the people, when you do get in spaces like this, that you have people that are willing to listen and help you think through. Peter Marcusa is a professor emeritus in urban planning at Columbia University. And the one thing I love about Peter, if I'm struggling with some theory about something, I could send Peter an email, and I guarantee you I'll get a response sometimes 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. He'll say, Rob, I just woke up, I was thinking about what you asked me the other day. And he sends me a response. So, you appreciate, there's certain ones. And as I said before, I prefaced it before, I was in a report by a bunch of professors critiquing another professor's proposal to join a community, and I was just like listening to some of the things. I'm like, I gotta get out of here before I explode. So, I think you find your spot. It's just I was lucky here and lucky at CUNY Law School, right? So at Take Back the Land, we needed to work closely with law professors. It's a progressive spot, right? And that's why you embrace places like this. And this is not to say they don't exist in other places. But again, the community needs to lead the process and the decision making. And there are a lot of smart people. They know what they want. They know how to get it. In some places around the world, they know how to get it a little bit better and go about it a little bit better than we do. But as long as we continue to share and have exchanges, hopefully there'll be that knowledge exchange between the different groups.
Are there other questions out there? And we also have Siobhan on the line too, if you want to direct questions on food sovereignty or Haiti.
I'm wondering, you all mentioned this idea of sort of politicizing the food justice, food sovereignty movement, and I feel like my personal experience is very North American, very Northeast focused, but I've found this sort of hesitancy or fear or concern about, stepping into the political arena or not wanting to be political. And so I'm wondering, what advice do you guys have? What can we learn from the international community, from outside of the Northeast, that can sort of help us move past that barrier to getting politicized?
Should we ask Shaban?
Yeah, that would be great. I think one thing that social movements do amazingly well in the Global South is political education. So it would be great to get Shaban.
Shaban?
Yes.
Shaban, uma companheira aqui está perguntando a partir de sua vivência aqui nos Estados Unidos como jovem, aqui na região nordeste dos Estados Unidos, de que tanto o sector da justiça alimentar nos Estados Unidos, muito particular nos Estados Unidos, tanto como o movimento por la soberania alimentaria, ella personalmente siente que às vezes se querem têm receio, medo de la parte política, de como politizar a luta. Então, se tu tem algum comentário a respeito.
Sí. Para nosotros, la cuestión de soberanía alimentaria es sobre todo una cuestión política.
So for us, food sovereignty is a question, is an issue, a political issue, fundamentally a political issue.
Porque hoy las multinacionales agrotóxicos y las multinacionales que controlan las semillas, las pesticidas como Monsanto, están también controlando a los gobiernos.
Because the multinationals and those that produce the agrochemicals, the multinationals that control the seeds, the seed market, and also the pesticide production, as Monsanto, those companies also control the government.
Por ejemplo, en muchos países las multinacionales están comprando a los senadores, los diputados, para hacer pasar leyes en favor de las multinacionales.
So in many countries, multinationals are buying out the citizens, buying out the Congress people to pass laws that actually will favor them, the business interests.
Hoy Monsanto está haciendo un trabajo en Brasil para hacer votar la ley sobre las semillas terminator.
So currently in Brazil, Monsanto is lobbying to pass the terminator legislation in the country.
Entonces, la vida es política. Entonces, para defender la vida hay que hacer política.
So life is a political act. So to defend life, you have to act political. You have to be political.
Por ejemplo, en Haití, después del terremoto, Monsanto estaba dando al gobierno haitiano un regalo, entre comillas, de más de 400 toneladas de semillas. Es un acto político. Era para eliminar a las semillas nativas que estamos utilizando desde 200 años.
So in Haiti, after the earthquake in 2010, Monsanto donated 200 tons of seeds, of hybrid seeds, which is necessarily a political act, because they actually are trying to move the interests and also destroying the local seeds that farmers, the peasants, develop over 200 years.
Entonces, para defender la tierra, para defender las semillas, para defender el modelo de agricultura que puede salvar al planeta, hay que hacer movilizaciones políticas a través de todos los países del mundo.
So, to defend the land, the seeds, and the peasant agriculture, we need to organize and create political mobilizations that around the globe, in all countries.
Entonces, porque hoy el poder del capital financiero es solamente con movilizaciones podemos enfrentar los programas de la economía verde que quiere transformar todos los recursos naturales en mercancías.
So, because to contain the power of the political capital, the global capital, to contain the green economy, the green development economy, it's necessary to create that the political power to contain those actors.
I'd like to comment on this too, if Siobhan is done. And that is it. I think there are a few sources of quietude around, or fear around raising politics. You know, one is that it's not polite. We have this idea in the United States that it's not polite to talk politics, which is a way of silencing people. But also, a lot of organizations are funded, you know, by capitalist organizations. Definitely, clearly. I mean, all the foundations obviously have money that's gotten from investments or something, right? I mean, they're taking money from people. Very few people just work and have the money, you know, in the bank, right? I mean, there's some kind of investment and money gleaned from other people's labor. So that's what the foundations are. But then there are these corporations that fund all sorts of things. And people are nervous with banks, you know, are nervous to bite the hand that feeds them. So they have their little community garden or a CSA, or they have their food pantry, or they have their organization, and they want to keep it going because it's a value. They feel that it's doing some good, and usually these organizations are doing some good. But, you know, we've gotten, Brooklyn Food Coalition has gotten phone calls from Coca-Cola and from a number of other organizations saying, well, wouldn't you like the money? And we say, no. You know, Whole Food is another one. No, we don't want the money. I mean, sure, we want the money. We're we're small and you know, very thin in terms of budget. But, you know, we don't want that money because that money influences how you speak and what you do. And I think that's, and you know, people feel that they don't want to alienate others. And I think we have to learn to speak in ways that are not jargon, that are direct. But I think we have to politicize ourselves and our movement, because without that, we can't get anywhere. We can't act like there isn't a world of corporate control, because there is. You know, we look at all of the Supreme Court decisions and our Congress. I mean, it's outrageous what they have rested upon us, and we can't act like, oh well, you know, we'll just ignore them, because they are getting more and more powerful, and it's going to be harder. The longer we wait to call them out, the harder it is going to be to create any kind of movement against them. And I think, you know, Rob's reference to Occupy, and that there were a lot of problems with Occupy, but there are also tremendous strengths of Occupy, right, because they did call out the corporations. I mean, they called out the 1%. Right. But it was really the corporations. But in agriculture, the financialization of land, water, and food is enormous, and that is global. And so you can't really talk about your community garden without reference to the financialization of agriculture globally. because that's the frame that you're dealing with. That's why you want your little tomatoes growing, but you can't survive only on your little tomatoes. Something else has to be going on, something else has to change.
I'll just quickly add that I don't think any of us up here want to be a politician, but I think we all want to be politicized, right? Because you're fighting political power. Power is politicized, and the force coming up against it has to also be politicized, right? And that's something I learned very quickly. I didn't always think in these terms. As I said, I got transformed in life, but it was on-the-job experience. You realize what is happening to people, right? And what is happening to you, what happened to your family in the past. And it can change it quickly, right? There's a great lady, I don't know if Nancy knows, she may, because she's a fellow academic. Her name is she's Gilda Haas. She's a strategic action for a just economy out in LA. She used to be the executive director. She has now built a website called Dr. Pop, where she does political pieces for us. And one of the most powerful pieces she did was something called Meltdown, which took the financial crisis that we went through and how mortgages were securitized and put it in terms that we could all digest and understand and get politicized in about 10 minutes. Like, holy shit,
Could you tell us what
The website is Dr. Dr. and Pop, P, no spaces, just Dr. Pop, drpop.org. And the piece that I'm talking about is called Meltdown. You watch that and you're looking at this and you're like, holy cow. But she puts up popular education. That's her contribution to the movement. She got politicized a long time ago, and she does popular education pieces for us. And I take them and run with them all the time, man. She does a dynamite job with it. So.
And if I can step in as moderator and just give a quick answer to that question, I think also we don't have a very good understanding of what politics actually is, what it means to be politicized. The story Rob told of the 14-year-old South African member of the Shack Brothers movement feeling his rights, that's just an experience that I've never seen anyone in the U.S. really have. And it sounds very extreme, but that's democracy. And I think one of the things that is so powerful about interacting with social movements is you realize that social movements aren't just like really good democracy or like, responses to extreme circumstances. It's like you need the people to be organized and mobilized at all times to have anything resembling democracy. And it calls for a very heightened sense of politicization. So anyway, are there actually other comments? Just because I know
I just have one comment to that.
Oh, can we
Go ahead,
hear and then go? Just
Okay. I wanted to ask a question to Siobhan and also to the panel. It's two separate
Okay,
questions.
so Salo,
I don't know if we have time. I can just.
Habla
It's kind of
español?
weird. I mean, it's like
No, you can.
because I can ask him in Spanish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just
But
translate
then it
it.
needs to be translated to the.
Shaban, hay un
Ah, yeah.
compañero aquí que habla y va a hablar,
I was just
hacer una pregunta para ti.
I'm just wondering if you can talk a bit about how like the work they do with youth, especially in rural contexts. There's difficulties in getting either work or where the agricultural economy is not particularly very effective at reproducing or helping livelihoods. And what kind of work do they do in trying to entice youth from leaving and actually getting engaged in working with agriculture, and seeing that as a generationally how the movement builds and grows, sustains itself.
It's a big question. Shaban?
Yes.
Bueno, el compañero aquí está preguntando cómo es el trabajo de MPP a respecto de la juventud, sobre el papel de la juventud en los procesos, en las áreas rurales, en defensa de la soberanía alimentaria. ¿Cómo ustedes atraen a la gente más joven para participar en los movimientos, en participar en la lucha? ¿Y cómo eso fortalece la lucha por la soberanía alimentaria?
Bien. Digamos en el MPP, tenemos como tres pilares, tres secciones interdependientes de uno a otro, los jóvenes, las mujeres y los hombres.
So NPP has three different sectors: women, youth, and men. That brings together the three sectors in the community.
Porque el porvenir del movimiento, el porvenir de una nueva sociedad es algo que tiene que ver con los jóvenes, porque en Haití 60% de la población tiene menos de 25 años.
So to achieve justice, social justice in Haiti, the participation of the leadership of youth has to be present. Youth has to be present in the equation, because 60% of the population in the country is under age of 25 years old.
Entonces, en el MPP, la juventud tiene un papel importante y indispensable.
So in MPP, the youth has an indispensable and important role.
Porque empezamos a organizar a los niños a la edad de 5 años.
And they start organizing the youth when they are as young as 5 years old.
En el movimiento de jóvenes tenemos tres subsectores, lo que llamamos previvero de los trabajadores, de los jóvenes trabajadores campesinos, entre 5 y 10 años.
So in the movement, they have three subsectors. There starts with kindergarten, like from the 5 to 12 years old.
And
they are organizing different sectors.
Y vivero de los trabajadores campesinos entre 10 y 15 años.
And then there is one sector from 10 to 15 years old.
Y a partir de 15 años, los niños entran en el movimiento de jóvenes.
So, and then after 15-year-old, they start participating in the youth movement of subsection.
Entonces, los jóvenes del movimiento, la lema es transformar el medio rural en un paraíso, para que los jóvenes se queden no solamente al campo, pero para atraer a personas de las ciudades a venir en el campo.
So the youth has an objective in NPP, which is to transform the countryside in a paradise. So that actually be good for them to live there, but also to attract people from the cities to participate, to join the movement. And come back to the
Entonces tenemos programas para mandar jóvenes pobres a estudiar en las universidades y para regresar a trabajar dentro del movimiento al campo.
So they have a program that of scholarship that pays for so the young people have access to college education, and then they can come back to support the work of the movement later.
Y hoy más del 90% de los cuadros de la organización son jóvenes que la organización mandó a estudiar a Puerto Príncipe, en República Dominicana, en Estados Unidos, en América Latina, que regresan a trabajar en el campo.
So I missed it. I'm not sure if somebody got the percentage. I heard 80% of the. Huh?
Ask him.
Chavan, ¿podrías repetir cuál es la porcentaje de gente que sale a estudiar? Que
Más de 90. 90.
So,
More than 90%.
more than 90% of the leadership, the organizers in MPP, are actually youth who went to Latin America, United States, and Dominican Republic to study, and now is back helping to the building and carry on the goals of the movement.
Y tenemos programas en agroecología, por ejemplo, en agosto. Cada agosto tenemos un campo de soberanía alimentaria con más de 500 jóvenes.
So they also have an agroecology program that happens in August, and they organize camps with more than 500 youth.
Entonces, este campo se llama Campo de Soberanía Alimentaria.
So this encampment, this camp it's called the camp food sovereignty camps.
Entonces capacitamos a los jóvenes sobre todos los temas y ellos participan en las movilizaciones, en los programas de radio, en la capacitación de los campesinos. Entonces, en el momento tenemos hoy 10,000 niños y jóvenes en el movimiento.
So they train the young people to participate in mobilizations, in radio programs, in trainings for other peasants, and currently they have 10,000 young people in the movement.
Estamos desarrollando hoy un programa para capacitar a agroecologistas que van a instalarse en el campo como técnicos que producen para no solamente para comer, pero vender y tener una vida mejor con la agroecología en el campo. Entonces estamos creando modelos de jóvenes, de nuevos modelos de agricultores en el campo con los jóvenes.
So they are creating the agroecologists, the new agroecologists that are actually going to go back to the countryside, to the rural villages, to the homes. That will help to produce healthy foods, not only to feed themselves, but also to sell, to share with to communities, other families. So basically, they are actually creating the new generation of farmers, and a new way also to rebuild the food system in Haiti.
When I was in Honduras, we met with one of the food sovereignty organizations. I was traveling with Grassroots International, which is like White Hunger, does wonderful solidarity work in the global south with farmers and financially supports them, without a lot of money, but still critical dollars. And one of the people that we met with was a youth that had been in one of these food sovereignty camps. And we were there in late October, and he was bursting, absolutely bursting with pride and knowledge and confidence. I mean, it was gorgeous to see this young man, he looked like 18 or something, who just came back with, a great mission to really accomplish leading his people. And it was just beautiful. And he had agroecological practice that he learned, and and farming techniques, but it was really more than that. It was this sense of the international solidarity, and I think maybe it was either in Brazil or Colombia. I'm really not sure. I'm forgetting where the camp was, but it And you can imagine people who have very little access to travel, very little access to cash to do much with, and being sent as a representative of your organization to a youth camp to share with other people like you and to grow like this. I mean, it was gorgeous. It was just a beautiful thing to see. So whatever we can contribute to these organizations, they make those dollars stretch like crazy, and they provide a framework for leadership to really grow. It's great.
So maybe we can hear both of your questions and comments, and then the panel respond. And
No, go ahead.
No, all I was wanting to say is that one of the reasons why in the United States, they're among some of the poorest people who have been dispossessed of land, who lost all kinds of things, particularly when you're in the Midwest or the South or other places, and particularly among white poor, is that they have been brainwashed and very, very much by the mass media to blame themselves. And there have been studies done of the extent of depression, the extent of suicide, and other things of that kind among them. And they're quite high. I actually had to give a paper I was about to in India, and one of the things I was talking about is how the Indians who have no education, who are landless laborers, who who understand politics and really understand so much more than many Americans who see it as their own issue, and they're ashamed of being poor, rather than saying, "What right do I have? Do you have to make me poor? It doesn't the society. What are my human rights?" They have it there, and I think that there might be a way to get some teaching of American young people, of people from third world countries.
yeah, I think that's one of the main issues of global solidarity is a lot of times folks in the U.S. think, oh, well, we need to bring people, and I think we need to go and learn. Because when it comes to this level of work, it's being done way better outside the U.S. Not to knock any of the amazing work and people doing work in the U.S., but it's just on another level.
I would certainly agree with Tristan. I think there's so much more to learn, and that's why I'm enthused when I come back here to share what I've learned. And when I went to Brazil for the Mavi encounter, what I saw was youth at the MST school do something called a mystica, and Salo laughs at me because I talk about this all the time now. I'm fascinated by this whole thing. So they take a part of their history. Everybody goes to school during the day at the MST school on a piece of property that they own. Then everybody sits down to a communal meal, and then under the stars, they act out a piece of their history with flame throwing and just acting out, singing and whatnot, and passing on their history. And I stood in awe night after night watching these mysticas saying, "Oh, we gotta bring this to the U.S. We gotta bring this to the U.S." So now I get in these circles, I keep saying, "The mystica, we gotta have it," and people are like looking at me, "What the hell are you talking about?" But it was just,
But this is really so core to what we are as human beings.
Absolutely.
Because this is how we evolve.
Exactly.
To be in smaller groups where we are sharing, we're singing, we're dancing, we're sharing food, all of these things. This is what makes us happy.
Yeah. It's being created here a little bit in Sunset Park at St. Jacobi Church, which was the base for Occupy Sandy. It's being run by a pastor named Juan Carlos Ruiz. I'm with the New York City Anti-Eviction Network, and we're working in Sunset Park, and one of his demands are when we go to the church, you guys can come and teach all you want, Rob, but the first hour, we're gonna sit down to a communal meal and talk to one another and get to know, share, and learn from one another. And that's his rule. The only negotiation I ever had with him was to shorten it to 45, but he will not go below 45 minutes. He demands an hour, and seriously, and I think it's so cool, right? It's just to share with you, you sit down and people are talking and having conversations, dancing, singing. There's a little culture. It's incredible.
So we've been here for about 2 hours. I guess I think we should probably close up the panel. I want to thank everyone for coming out. I want to thank everyone on the panel for coming out, especially, and thank Siobhan for joining us by Skype. Incredibly difficult, and Siobhan was been traveling and was doing events in Haiti all day, so it's really special that you can join us.
Can I make a couple of quick announcements in the back? There are some, there's information about this farm worker in New York State, Bill of Rights for Farm Workers. Please take this. There's this lobby day on May 5th, and on April 24th, there's a panel discussion that you can, if you Google rural and migrant ministries, you can find that. And then also in Brooklyn on April 28th, there's going to be a discussion of justice and sustainable restaurants that's sponsored by the Restaurant Opportunity Center and Brooklyn Food Coalition, talking with restaurateurs and restaurant workers about, what are their struggles to create an industry that has decent jobs. And then the last thing I'll shamelessly say is on May 3rd, if you're interested in being part of the Brooklyn Food Coalition, on May 3rd, it's a Saturday, we're having a meeting a membership relaunch, and you're very welcome to join us. It's at noon at Union Temple 17 Eastern Parkway at Grand Ole Plaza. Get involved because you can shape things, and we need you to do that. And then finally, I have an article, I have a few copies here, not too many, in the recent issue of Radical Teacher on the radical potential of the food justice movement. Again, you can Google it. It's Radical Teacher Pittsburgh, it's the University of Pittsburgh, but I have a few extra copies here.
And finally, thank you to Salo for translating and organizing this whole panel.
So I wanna say also, global solidarity starts with sharing resources. And thanks so much for coming here, putting your time here. I think it should be a beginning of a conversation. Thanks for CUNY, Mary, and Professor David, for opening the space for us. Is sharing resources and the commitment of Mary and Professor David to the social movements. Is that what make us to continue doing those type of work? Let's continue supporting social movements to strengthen democracy, to create more plural societies that we can move on and create a more justice, achieve justice in our lives. So thank you so much for being here.
How are you?
Okay. I don't have a book, but I will shoot you an email. Grace Davy? Grace Davy.
I was in Maharashtra, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala.
We will probably have it up in an email like that. Thank you for coming. They're just coming together for Saturday. We got the office to meet, so everything coming together, right? There was a couple of years. We saw Ari on it.
I traveled mostly with women's organizations, the Tamil Nadu Women's Club.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So many groups.
So many groups, it's unbelievable, but I am going to give you this because I have my email address.
Oh, good.
And I would love to have a chance to talk with you sometime.
Yeah.
Now that I am,
she gave me
Did you retire?
I had to.
I'm retired. I'm on sabbatical this year. I'm going to come back for one semester.
Okay.
But you're younger
so
than
far.
me.
Okay.
I don't want to be bothered with
Okay.
you anymore.
If you have,
Well, I couldn't
care to
do it.
comment
It was
on
just
it,
too much.
might
I certainly will. I will email you.
I don't mind if you critique it.
Okay.
Marching it down and
Okay.
then I'll try something else.
Okay.
Also,
Well, you said we're going to shoot it down. Give me an opportunity to read it.
Yeah. I just need, I'm happy to have.
I knew you were
I'm
old.
still
I know a ton of students. I probably just can't read the book by name, but I, just.
Yeah.